Well, growing up in Newport was, as I look back, was just a phenomenal experience. Being able to leave my house at 508 South Bayfront and play from one end of Balboa Island to Little Island, and the only requirement was to be home by dark. And so all kinds of things happened between those times. And there wasn't any worry about issues, really major issues. The kids all had fun together.
And there were sand lots, you could play baseball.
There were sand lots, we played baseball. I can't tell you how many windows I broke by hitting a ball through a window, and then my dad would get so mad he'd have to come and fix it himself, which he did. And then going surfing, we started surfing at about 9 or 10 years old, which would be 1957 or 8. I got my first surfboard from Hobie Surfboards. And we'd all join at the ferry landing at 5:30 or 6 o'clock when it opened, and the guys from Corona del Mar would come down, and we had these racks that we could take that had wheels on them, and we could take our longboards, our long surfboards, and ride along the peninsula out to 19th Street or 20th Street and surf for the morning and come home. And so those were great days. And of course I grew up with BIYC. I started swimming when I was 4 years old. I'll never forget having to hold on to a bamboo stick with 3 other kids as the teacher pulled us in a direction trying to teach us to learn how to kick. The water was so cold. And anyway, later on getting into the Balboa Island Yacht Club and competing in paddleboarding and swimming and diving and rowboats and the Round the Island row, all those things were so much fun.
We still have his BIYC trophies in our trophy case too.
But it was really fun to grow up with all of that excitement and learning how to compete. In those early days, when I was 8 years old, one of my responsibilities was to go out and rake the beach in front of our home at 508 and prepare the beach for the people that would be coming to rent paddleboards. And so the paddleboards and kayaks were kept underneath our house. And after the beach was cleaned by me, then the bigger guys would bring the boards out and set them on the beach so that they could be rented, and my sister would rent them. And so I used to get $0.25 an hour for doing that. I was born at St. Joe's Hospital in Orange, and I grew up at 508 South Bayfront on Balboa Island. As my father tells me the story, the building that became the home that I grew up in was something that they had moved from another lot on Balboa Island to where it was on the bayfront.
And it came in by barge.
And before that, it came in by barge from Long Beach. My mom was raised in Eagle Rock, and my father was raised in Los Angeles. And my father started out with a little paper route in Los Angeles, and he used to make some money with that. And then he'd come down with his father to Balboa. My grandparents were broken up, and so Dad used to come down with his father, and they would stay over the weekends, and then they would take the what do they call it, the red cars, and go back to Los Angeles. My father moved down here actually as a late teenager. He and his father lived in one of the first 5 houses in old Corona del Mar on the flower streets.
And that house is still there?
That house is still there, and it's about 2 blocks off the ocean. But back when they lived in that house, it had an ocean view. There were no other houses in the area. And so then they used to go over to Balboa, the fun zone area, and my grandfather, whom I never met, actually ran the first ferry boat that ran from the pavilion area to the base of Bayside Drive by Corona del Mar. They had started to build that big hotel up in Corona del Mar, and they wanted to get people to come back and forth. So anyway, my grandfather was a skipper, and my dad ended up working as a mechanic in the boatyards there at the fun zone. There was actually a boatyard there. And then he started into his boat rental business about in the early 30s. My dad started his business actually over at the Balboa Pavilion. He had 2 like 26-foot boats, the Miss California and the Queen, and he used to run those out of the Balboa Pavilion. and they charged 50 cents a ride to go from the pavilion out around the Balboa and back. And so my father would pick up people at the pavilion, and I think he had to pay a percentage rent. And anyway, something happened. This was, I should say that my father actually, before that time, worked in the pavilion and took tickets for the dance. He set up pins for the bowling alley. He did just about anything in order to survive in Balboa. But once he started into his boat rental business, then he had these two boats. My grandfather ran one of them, my father ran the other one. And they got kicked out of the pavilion, and so they had no place to go. And what they did is they got a barker on the sidewalk to bark out, speedboat ride out around the Balboa and back for 50 cents. And my dad would sit off the dock and actually with his boat, and he'd swoop into the public pier that was there and pick up the customers and take them for a ride. My dad knew that wouldn't last long, and so he decided to try to get a piece of property where he'd have access to the bay and to the ocean, because he didn't think that there'd be any long-term benefit in the way he was going. And so he ended up purchasing the first property in Balboa, which is directly across the street from where the fun zone is, where you see the speedboat sign up above. He started there before he ever came to Balboa Island. I think it was approximately 1935 when he purchased the lot on Balboa Island and the house there. My dad was an extremely good mechanic that kept these 11 motorboats going all the time. He overhauled them every winter, take them apart and put them back together, these motors, 24 horsepower gray marine engines.
But there was always in the summer the people that went out in the ocean when they weren't supposed to, or they went in the back bay and got on a sandbar when they weren't supposed to, or we'd have a date and he'd say, "I'll be late, I have to go find one of the boats that hasn't come in."
Yeah. The U Drive sign that sits over on the Balboa Peninsula is a sign my dad put together back, I believe. It has all the comments beneath it. It's become a historical landmark in the city of Newport. It was dedicated about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's a sign that he put together just to let people know that this is where we have boat rentals, and it's been a great draw, and it's also been a great article for comment. Bob Tiller, when he got out of USC, he was looking for something to start, a business to start, and he was looking for space so that he could begin his business. And he was actually 2 blocks away, not in the fun zone area, but I think in the next block. And my father had heard that he was interested somehow in getting some space. And so my dad actually went down and found Bob Teller looking into other space, and he says, "I have space in my old hotel here, the Bayview Hotel. You might want to take a look at it." So Bob came down and he leased the space, and that's where he started his frozen banana stand.
He did lemonade out of there too, didn't he?
Lemonade, Bob's Lemonade, and then he did frozen bananas too, and competed with the business that was straight across the street. We had a small group of people though during my elementary, maybe it was junior high years. We learned from the people that were older than us, that it could be really fun at Halloween to play tricks on people because everybody was doing bad to each other and so forth. And so what we heard is that if you take some eggs and go around behind the Marine Street into the alleyway and throw the eggs up into the eucalyptus trees, the yolk would all drop on the people, and the sidewalks were packed with people dressed in Halloween costumes and stuff. And so that was our funny ha-ha, until the police figured out that we were part of what was called the Blue Jacket Gang. And the Blue Jacket Gang was just these blue nylon jackets that everybody wore, all the kids, because you could wear them surfing, you could wear them out at night to a game or something, or do whatever you want. And so we would put these eggs in these blue jackets, and the police figured out that we were possibly the ones that were throwing the eggs into the eucalyptus trees, and they would come up and pat our jackets down back in the day. And there was no social distancing then. And so there we were with eggs broken in our pockets. But we were just little troublemakers. I began my education at Corona Del Mar Elementary School From there, I went to Harbor View Elementary. From there, I went to Horace Ensign, where I went to 7th grade. In 8th grade, they opened up Lincoln Junior High School, and so I went there and opened up there. And from Lincoln, I went to Corona Del Mar High School.
The first year that Corona Del Mar
First year that Corona Del Mar opened. So I never saw any landscaping for the first half of my education. It was all just buildings. And anyway, and then from Corona Del Mar, I went to Orange Coast College and had a couple good years there, and then to UCLA.
I grew up in West Newport. Actually, I moved there when I was 8 years old, and grew up playing in the fields over there, and I had a sister and 2 brothers, and I went to Newport Heights, and then I went to Horace Ensign, and then I went to Harbor High before I went to Orange Coast. So met John at Orange Coast. I knew who he was because his Corona Del Mar basketball team always beat our basketball team. Didn't like him a bit. But anyway, we were a blind date when we got to Orange Coast. Our favorite place to go was Will Wright's Ice Cream. That used to be by the bridge.
On Coast Highway by the bridge, the Coast Highway Bridge, and right across from Bay Shores there. Playing for John Wooden was one of the great experiences of my life. I will, my mom and dad were, of course, living on 508 South Bayfront, and John Wooden didn't go out to recruit players much in that day. But he wanted me, and the assistant coach was excited about having me come in because Lucius Allen and Mike Warren were going to be gone, and they needed somebody who could shoot. And they saw me play one night, and I did well. And so they came down to the house, which was a great compliment to me. Coach Wooden and Nell, his wife, they drove down to see us. And of course, Nell had a glass of wine, but Coach Wooden didn't have any wine. And we really had a good time together. And anyway, I went up to the school and asked Coach Wooden, would I actually have a chance to play? And he said, yes, you will have a chance to play, but I can guarantee you nothing. That was good enough for me. And so I went there. The first day of practice, he gathered the team together in a room, and he wanted to explain to us his goals and the goals for the team for the year. And there we were sitting in this little room, and Curtis Rowe and Sidney Wicks and Lynn Shackelford. 2 people for me was Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I'll never forget Coach Wooden walking into the room. And the first thing he said is, gentlemen, I want you to take your shoes and socks off now. And I looked up and I thought, what are we doing here? Because I'd never heard about this story. He says, I want you to take your shoes and socks off. First thing, we'll say Kareem said was, come on, Coach, not the sock story again. This was Kareem's 4th time to learn how to put on a pair of shoes and socks. He says, Coach says, I don't want one of you to have a blister as a result of not knowing how to put on your socks properly each day and to get your shoes on. So here we go. And he taught us how to put on shoes and socks. My first time, Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's 4th time. And from there, he went to his Pyramid of Success. He says, I'm very interested in winning, as I'm sure you are. I know you all want to win. He says, we'll not talk about those terms ever again this year. We will not talk about winning or losing. He says, what I'm far more interested in is your effort to be the best you could be as a person and a player on this team. And that's what we will set as our goal. He called it competitive greatness. It was the top of his Pyramid of Success. It's being the best you can be when your best is needed. And he set foundations like enthusiasm and industriousness and loyalty and cooperation, teamwork, eagerness to sacrifice personal interest for the glory of the team. These are the sort of things, and then of course skills, but those are the things that he was always teaching. Coach Wooden and Karen had a great relationship, probably better than my relationship, because I was the player and Karen was the cute gal who was dating John. And anyway, it came time for me to leave school and go off and play basketball, and I signed a nice contract with the Atlanta Hawks. And so I was either going to go there alone or some other option might come up. After 3 years of dating, I asked Karen, I said, Karen, what do you think about going to Atlanta and I'll be playing for the Hawks and you can come and we could live together and you could work if you want to, but if you don't want to work, that'd be fine too. She looked at me and she said, is that your best offer? And of course I went on my heels then with that, and I thought, oh my gosh, now what do I got to do? I got to really step up, or I've got to do something. Because now I'm like, oh, I got to be an adult. And so I went to my dad and I asked him what he thought, and he said he thought she was really a special girl. And then I went to Coach Wooden, and I'm sitting there with Coach Wooden, and I said, Coach, I'm going off to Atlanta to play basketball, and I've signed this nice contract, and I just don't know what to do for sure about Karen. And he looked at me, and before I could ask the question, should I marry her? He says, you marry that girl. So ever since that, I always always have fun with Coach, and I'd say, Coach, I know if Karen had had a jump shot, she'd have played ahead of me, huh? And so that's the way our relationship started in the old days. Karen and I married in 1970, and I signed a basketball contract with the Atlanta Hawks. And so we went to Atlanta to live and play for the NBA team. And then in our second year, we were traded to the Houston Rockets. And so we went and lived in Houston for a while. And then after that, I got a job to play and to coach the Brussels, Belgium Lions. And so we went over there and I coached a team and also played on that team. So we moved around a little bit.
And we lived in an apartment in Atlanta, and when we got traded to Houston, they gave us 24 hours to be in Houston. So we flew to Houston, picked an apartment. He stayed. I went home, packed us up, moved us to Houston. Yeah, and that's pretty much the life of a pro athlete. They do pay for you to be moved, but it was all on me to get us moved. And anyway, so yes, I was there. I didn't travel with the team. When the team traveled, I stayed in Houston or Atlanta. Coaches didn't allow wives to travel with the team usually.
But getting to travel all over the country for me as a basketball player was great, to see the different cities and to meet so many different people. And many of my teammates were big stars, unlike myself. And so I was around that sort of an athlete. And I was also playing a lot of volleyball on the beach and was very successful with that as well. So met a lot of nice people, and getting to travel to Brussels, Belgium, and then taking the train down to Spain and playing down in Spain and up in Germany and
Israel.
And then we flew to Israel and Switzerland. Those are places that I got to travel to, and it was all good. When I was asked to play with Wilt's Big Dippers volleyball 4-man team, and we used to play against 6-man teams, and I was one of the stars on the 4-man team that made Wilt look good, because Wilt couldn't play volleyball, but he loved the game and he liked chasing the girls on the beach. So anyway, I was getting $100 a night to play and perform with this guy named Larry Rundle. We used to do all the work on the 4-man team. And so I said to the little manager that we had, I said, I think I was deserving of more money because I'd come from national championships in basketball, and I was on the #1 team on the beach in 2-man volleyball. So I said, I think I should get a raise. And so the guy that's the manager, Gene Selznick, he says, well, how much do you think you should get? And I said, I think I should get $400 a night. I mean, Wilt was walking over to the collection area after the game, and he'd pick up $2,500 in cash and walk away. I said, I'm deserving of $400. I'm doing the work, and I'm somebody who actually people know in the game. And he says, well, I'll go and the manager, Gene, says, I'll talk to Wilt and I'll get back to you. So about a week later, I hooked up with Gene Selznick, and I said, what'd you find out? He says, I told Wilt all about what you thought you should get. He said to me, he says, we don't need John anymore. And that was the end of my pro volleyball experience.
In 1974, when we came back from Houston, we bought our house. And then we went to Brussels, Belgium in January of '75. And lo and behold, I found out I was pregnant. We came home in the early summer of 75, and Eric was born in August of 1975, and Aaron was born in December of 1978. When our daughter, Erin, was in the 4th grade, she was diagnosed with rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a cancer of the soft muscle tissue. She had a tumor in her abdomen about the size of a cantaloupe, and it was right before Halloween, and we took her to our pediatrician, who sent us to CHOC, who sent us to an oncologist, and within 3 days she'd had surgery, and she was starting on a chemotherapy regimen. And she fought for 2.5 years, and she was in and out of school. She lost her hair. She never lost her spirit. And we skied, we went on family vacations, and we did everything as normal as possible.
The hardest question I've ever had to answer in my life was one day we were coming, my daughter Erin and I were coming home from CHOC, and she was getting a little break so she could be in the home. And as we were driving past the airport, she looked at me, she says, "Dad, why do I have to die?" So I had to figure out an answer here for this little girl. She's looking to me for the future, for the support. And I said, "Honey," and I started to tear up with the question. And I said to her, "We all have to die at some point. That's the life experience." And I said, "But one day, you and I will be in heaven together."
So when she was told she wasn't going to live, she said, "Okay, then I've always wanted a pig, so I want my pig now." And it was during the Orange County Fair, and a friend of mine went up to the people in the pig department and brought us home a potbelly pig. And she named it Porky, and that pig laid in bed with her, much to the chagrin of her doctors, who were not happy that she had a pig in her bed. But when she was home, that pig was next to her all the time. The pig didn't like the boys, but the pig liked Erin and it liked me. And she had her pig. And the other thing she wanted to do was see the Nelson brothers again. Now, Ricky Nelson's sons had their little rock band, and they took our daughter under their wing. And she went to their concerts, she went backstage, she got to see them different times when they weren't performing. And so one night their tour bus was coming from San Diego to LA, and about 11 o'clock at night they stopped the bus at CHOC, and I knew they were coming. I let them in the back door. The nurses knew they were coming. We just brought them up the stairs, and the whole floor of kids were so excited that these band members had come to see them. I mean, they only had 11 o'clock at night to be there, but these kids, they're getting chemotherapy and they don't sleep anyway. They didn't care if it was the middle of the night. They were all up, the lights were all on, and the Nelson brothers had come to see the kids in the hospital, which was way cool. To make sure that other families don't have to go through what we went through, John has sat on the board of Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation for almost 40 years now, and we've helped raise a lot of money. We have different galas and Dribble for the Cure at UCLA and different events, but our daughter was the kind of person that she was very charismatic, and people loved her dearly. We had a gala for 500 people, and she got up and took the microphone from her dad and said, "Dad, go sit down. I'm going to talk to the people now."
I was president of the foundation.
And she would say, "I want you all to give because I don't want other kids to do what I've had to do." And
she asked me, she says, "Dad, do you think I will live until Christmas?" And I said, "Honey, I don't know if I'm going to live until Christmas, because none of us gets to have control of that part of our lives. All I know is each one of us, every one of us, at some point will die. But by faith, we believe that someday we'll be in heaven, and there'll be no chemo, there'll be no radiation, there'll just be total peace and happiness."
she passed away in September. She didn't get to Christmas that year, which was she wanted to do, but anyway. Eric traveled that road with us, and he was a teenager at the time. I think it was a hard time for him,
but he was a precious supporter as well
Yeah.
of what we were going through.
My sister Erin's struggle with cancer when we were both young was a difficult time in all of our lives. And it started when I think she first was diagnosed when I was in 8th grade. And 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade were difficult years for me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, especially in retrospect, great years for me. Those times taught me a lot about being independent, taking care of myself, being responsible for my own things, getting myself to practice, taking care of my schoolwork. And I think I knew early on, my parents needed to be with my sister. They didn't necessarily need to be with me. And it was great that I'm glad that I was able to take care of those things and be responsible for myself so that she could get the care that she needed. The hardest thing about my sister's passing is the thought that I think we'd be best friends today. Our families, our kids, holidays, I really miss the opportunity to do all of that. But at the same time, our family is big believers God has a plan for all of us. And her plan was to do 12 years and nothing more. And it's a disappointment, but there's so many blessings that came out of her being with us for that time. And I miss her greatly, but it's not easy. And but the time that she was sick and all those sorts of things really helped me get a better grip on life, appreciation for it, that it's short, it could end at any moment. And I think it allows me today to try and live more in the moment, not worry about the future so much or even mistakes in the past. It's just enjoy now for now because you don't know when it's going to be over.
I coached a lot of sports. I coached basketball and baseball and soccer for my children, both boys and girls. And then when Eric became a high school, I did club with all those sports. And then when Eric became a freshman in high school, I joined with a fellow named Tim Parcella. We co-coached the JV team.
And freshman team.
No, it was the freshman team at Newport Harbor High School.
Having my dad coach me it was awesome, but yet difficult at the same time. I mean, it's one of those things where I think, and I see it a lot in my players as I'm coaching, that you don't want to hear from your parents all the time. And, my dad's achieved just about everything there is to achieve in sports, both basketball and volleyball. And it's still to this day hard to hear some of the things that he has to say, even though it's not that he's wrong, it's just that that's a parent-child relationship. And so it was hard at times. It's also great at times because I know nobody else understands it as much as he would, because he's been through the struggles of winning and losing and all that kind of thing. So having him coach me, I think, was probably the greatest thing I could have asked for, even if at the time I didn't fully understand or get it. But he's an amazing coach, and a lot of what I try to do is follow in his footsteps. The things he said, the way he operated, practice planning, etc. Just making sure that my players know I'm there for them. And I learned a lot of that from him. So having him coach me I couldn't ask for anything better.
I believe that Eric learned the principles of the pyramid of success. I believe those principles grew on Eric over the years. And I taught it to soccer, basketball, and baseball teams throughout my children's youth.
Competitive greatness, a term coined by John Wooden in his Pyramid of Success, something that I've had beat over my head since I was a little kid. My very first soccer team, I'm pretty sure Dad sat the entire group down, Pyramid of Success, we're going through it, block by block, to build a team culture that is something that I believe is important, as a player, as a coach. But year after year after year, I mean, it got to a point where we would have another beginning of the year team meeting. Oh man, we got to do the pyramid again. And for me, it's repetitive, but for a lot of kids, it's the first time experiencing it, and parents would get to come in and hear. But it's almost like at this point, I could recite it verbatim. I've heard it so many times, and it's fun and it's funny at the same, because again, Dad talks about his sock story with Coach Wooden. He's like, oh, Coach, not the sock story again. And for me, it's kind of the pyramid's the same thing. So me as a player, it's something I wanted to incorporate, not just for myself, but try to get my teammates to feel that same thing. And then now as a coach, I'm coaching a lot of different levels, college, high school, and on down, and I want to use those same tools that were taught to me by Dad, that were pounded into me year after year, and hopefully I can have a little bit of effect on the people that I'm coaching and trying to not just make them better players, but better people.
My son Eric, the light of my life, has a lovely wife and a great daughter. She's graduating from high school this year, and we're very proud of the whole family. We're a small family, but we're very blessed.
My wife Suzanne and I met in my third year at UCLA, was playing volleyball still, and the addition of her to my life in my last few years at school was amazing. We got a chance to win another championship during that time. She got to witness it, which was even better. And it really kind of helped catapult me into more of my adult life. Having her stability, she was already graduated from school, she's a couple years older than me, and like I said, just provided that stability for me to get going on, finish school, get going into my career choices. And then ultimately we got married right after I graduated in the year 2000 and starting our family together shortly thereafter. My daughter was born in 2004, and it's been such a blessing having her in our family, growing up, following in a lot of the sporting athletic footsteps of my dad and myself. She embodies a lot of the competitive greatness that we've talked about, and watching her go through her gymnastics. She chose gymnastics as a sport, my daughter did, and gymnastics is a brutal sport. It's amazing how many injuries, how emotionally taxing, how much time it goes into over anything I ever did, over anything my dad ever did. And it was so much fun to watch her do something a little different from the average soccer player, basketball player, baseball player, something like that. She chose her own path, and she is competitive beyond belief, just like the rest of us, always wants to be perfect, which has been a hard lesson for her, as it is for many of us, that perfect is almost unattainable, but in chasing it, usually the results will come. And ultimately, she had to retire from gymnastics due to injury, which was a very sad day for everybody, but she's discovered diving, and she's become an excellent diver in the last couple of years, and she's now graduating from Newport Harbor High School and gonna go be on the dive team at Pepperdine University in Malibu. So we're so excited with all she's accomplished, again, blazing her own path. I think that's one of the most admirable things for me as her dad, is that she didn't do the normal things that most kids do. She did what she wanted to do on her own terms, and she's still doing it, and I couldn't be more proud of what she's doing. I currently coach Newport Harbor High School, both boys and girls, Vanguard University men's program, and I coach a couple of juniors club teams as well. And moving away from my corporate jobs, back into coaching, falling in love with the sport that gave me so much again, after leaving it behind previously, has been such a blessing. And being able to have an impact on young kids, good players, play at a high level, it's so rewarding and so much fun. And even though now that I'm older and my body doesn't move the way that it used to, that competitive spirit inside of me never goes away. Just recently, my Newport Harbor squad, we won the CIF section title, the CIF state title, and we were just recently named the national champions for 2022. And I couldn't be more proud of that group of guys, and it's been such a wonderful journey.
I was diagnosed in 2002 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I fell out of remission from the stem cell transplant, the autologous stem cell transplant. The next step was the last step, and that's to do an unrelated donor transplant. And that's when you get the stem cells from a donor, and they fly them or get them to wherever they need to go.
2 years pass, and then you're allowed to write a letter to your donor, and it's passed on to him. And if he so chooses to answer the letter, he can answer it direct, and he did.
So Mr. Hoffmeister then had a daughter that was living in the East Coast, and Mr. Hofmeister decided to come over and to visit her. And so we could have a chance to go meet Mr. Hofmeister. So Karen and I flew back to the East Coast, and we drove down to this house that the Hofmeisters were staying in. Mr. Hofmeister doesn't speak English, and I don't speak German.
But his daughters do.
And
They speak both.
So we had an interpreter there and the daughters. And when I saw the man, I mean, I could only go up and hug him and tell him how thankful I was. He was actually taller than I was, and just the nicest man, and we had the greatest time there. And a lot of people asked me, did anything else come from that? And I said that I've always enjoyed German beer ever since. So we opened up Newport Ski Company, which was about 4 doors away from Ski Mart. So Ski Mart was a 10,000 square foot store that was in its heyday doing well. And we were about 2,500 square feet just down the street. And we started fitting boots and selling skis, and people were happy with us, and we grew and got better. And Ski Mart went into bankruptcy. We ended up buying them for next to nothing out of bankruptcy. We moved into the big building. We kept the little building. And so the business prospered greatly. We actually ended up opening a second store up in Tustin, or in Orange rather, it was in Orange. And so that business was very successful for us for about 25 years.
I like the activity. I like to be able to walk to places. I like that if you want to see people, you can go and sit out front on the boardwalk, and there's always people to talk to. And I think it'll be a wonderful place as we get older, that you don't become secluded and not have interaction with people. And you can walk down to Wilma's for breakfast, or the little Mexican restaurant for dinner. And now we have Irvine Ranch Market. I'm so happy about that because they have most of what I need, and it's just a great little community. I really enjoy it. I've loved growing up in Newport Beach, and we never thought we would be living back here on Balboa Island. We lived up in Baycrest for 40 years before we moved down here, and thought we'd be there forever, but life changes, and so here we are. We built a house 3 years ago, and so we're happy to be here.
I, on the other hand, love the ocean. Like moving to Atlanta, moving to Houston, moving to Brussels, Belgium, I couldn't wait to get back to Newport and be close to the ocean again. I love to be in it. I love to see it. I love to see the waves break. I love to hear the waves break. Our house is designed in such a way that the bay is brought right back into the front room. And it's just wonderful to sleep with the windows open and enjoy the sounds of the bay. And I love to swim in it. Back in the day, I told my father, I said, we're no longer in the boat rental business, Dad. We're in the real estate business. And he looked at me and he says, this was in 1975, he says, John, you could never make money in real estate. And the reason he said that is that from 1945, when he bought 2 lots, sand lots on the Balboa Peninsula, he held them for 10 years through 55, and he sold them for the same price that he bought them for. So he was convinced you could never make money in real estate. So in 1975, Orange County started to change. And that's when I drove him around and told him about how much per square foot and these places were getting for rent. And he said to me, he says, well, how much a month? He didn't think in terms of square feet or that sort of thing, but I had gotten a real estate license, and so I was really interested in the real estate side. Then he wanted to sell one of his properties. I said, no, let's don't. You go play golf, I'll run the property. So I ran the business during the same time that I was involved with Newport Ski Company.
In West Newport, where I grew up, there were train tracks that came down Seashore Avenue. We dug tunnels under the train tracks. We built forts out of tumbleweeds in those sand lots, and it was just it was there was no no. What am I trying to say?
It was a much smaller town at that time.
It was a smaller town. Everybody knew everybody. And then you grew up here. There was no Irvine Terrace. There was no Fashion Island on your side of the bay.
Right.
Sand lots on Balboa Island. So we've seen it all change. It's changed a lot in our lifetime.
I think part of the deal for me too is just the legacy of what my father started with, a paper route in Los Angeles, and coming down here and having just enough money to buy one boat and then get 2 boats, and then get 4 and 8 and 10 and eventually 25, 30 boats, paddleboards and kayaks, and to see what he did as a father and a businessman. I used to watch him write in his ledger what he did during the day, spent this on that, and to have that sort of mentoring take place and to grow up in that kind of business. And then I took over his business in 1975 and have run it since, and it's just great to have the grounding of a small business person and to be a small business person.
My contribution to the family legacy here in Newport is I've taken up photography, and even though photography takes a lot of people around the world, I've set out with a specific goal to capture many of my favorite areas around Newport. From the piers to the islands to the bay, the ocean. There's so many unique things that still exist, that old buildings, old landmarks and stuff like that, but also the way things have changed so much too. And there's so many timeless opportunities and images to be captured that it's so much fun for me. And again, it goes back to my pride for my town, and being that I never want to leave, I want to be able to show other people what it looks like through my eyes. And photography has been such a fun outlet. Never set out for it to be any sort of business, but I've been fortunate enough to be able to sell some things here and there and work with some interior designers here in town. And it's just it's a new way to see my town too. Even though growing up here with my family tradition and all that, the world looks different through a viewfinder.
We have a lot of history and a lot of experiences that have been great. It's been a fantastic time together. Besides that, if I'd have known, as beautiful as she is, that she could cook as well as she does now, I've been the biggest fool ever to not try to marry this girl back in the day. So I've been blessed beyond my wildest dreams. I rake the beach each day. I sweep the sidewalk just like I did when I was a kid. And so I get to visit with a lot of people that are walking the island all the time. And it's just a great pleasure to be able to go back to where I started, even if I don't get paid for any of the stuff that I do anymore.
And every day he puts a heart in the sand for me.